So good evening once more. Like I said, we're going to treat requirement gathering as a business analyst. So, requirement gathering is one of the most critical activities for business analysts in any project. It involves identifying, documenting, and ensuring that the needs and the expectation of stakeholders are clearly understood and aligned with the business objectives. This is the major work of a business analyst. Start from requirement. Every other thing is setting ground on trying to understand stakeholder analysis. Everything is just to help you capture quality requirement from the stakeholders. This is very, very important because you determine the requirements. If you capture wrong requirements, it's going to go a long way to hurt the project. That's the importance of requirement gathering. And you might have difficult stakeholders. Some stakeholders, they might not be able to articulate what they want. So being a professional, you are going to guide them to be able to capture quality requirement from them. So what is this requirement gathering? Requirement gathering is the process of determining what a project must accomplish. What are those things a project must accomplish? It's very, very important. So you have to engage stakeholders to understand their need in order to understand what the projects tend to accomplish. Defining clear, actionable, and measurable requirements. We've talked about SMART. At this point, some of these things we've learned before, techniques, you need to equally bring them in. Ensuring alignment with business objectives. This is what requirement gathering is all about, trying to understand stakeholders. It's not very easy to understand stakeholders' expectation. It's not very easy. That's why the higher quality or experienced business analysts who must have, because if you are missing anything, a lot of project requires a lot of capital, a lot of money, from your organization, and you determine what needs to be done. It's not the project manager that determines, you that the requirements you gather will form what everybody will start managing. So let's look at the key questions here. When you're trying to set a table, what problem are we solving? Who are the stakeholders? What is the project scope? So if you understand the problem you are solving, well, you cannot understand the problem you are solving if you do not understand the stakeholders. And that's why it's good to do proper stakeholder analysis to understand the stakeholders. This will help you to understand their problems. And you will clearly, with the stakeholders, define the scope. We have different types of requirements. We have business requirements. We have stakeholder requirements. We have functional requirements, and we have non-functional requirements. And what is the business requirements. There are high-level needs of the organization, such as increasing revenue, reducing operational costs. These are so many things that organizations are looking for: increasing revenue or stopping the sales going down. They want to find why the sale is going down and stop the decline in sales. This can be a requirement, a high-level need. You must find what is causing this sale. Every company, even non-governmental organization, they want to increase their revenue. Everybody want to increase revenue. So then we have stakeholder requirements. These are needs of specific stakeholders or group. We have stakeholders like within the unit of an organization. They can have their own specific requirements, such as marketing department, finance department, sales department, human resources department. These are a group of stakeholders, or it can be a particular stakeholder, which is the head of the department. They might have their own specific need within the organization. That is not the high-level business requirement of the organization. So we can capture their need within there. Their need can be trying to implement one software or the other software to help their improve their work efficiency, like implementing ERP, CRM. All these applications within a department can be a departmental or stakeholder requirement. Then we have functional requirement. Functional requirement means specific behavior or function that the system must perform. If you capture stakeholder requirements, it will drill down to functional and non-functional requirements. If you capture business requirements, everything will come down to, if you are implementing a technology or application or solution, we call it solution, to solve their problems. Most of the time, we are going to implement a system. In some cases, we are not going to implement any system. We've discussed it from the beginning. Solutions, using solutions to solve business analysis problem, and using non-enterprise solution to solve problems. So it can come down to functional and non-functional requirements. So when we are talking about non-functional requirements, there can be system qualities like security, performance, and usability. And when we talk about functional requirements, there are specific behavior, function that a system must perform. And this is the key things we need to understand. This will form the foundation of us being a business analyst. If we can understand these types of requirements, these 4 requirements, understand them very well, then this is where we start making a good business, because this is the time we start, involving in the real process. Let's look at key points when we are trying to gather requirements from stakeholders. There are some key points we must have to start with. We have to identify the stakeholders. Identify the key players. They can be clients, they can be users, management team. We've done that during stakeholder analysis. We have to understand our stakeholders. We need to understand their influence, need, and expectation. We've captured that already. We've treated it in stakeholder analysis. So that's why stakeholder management and stakeholder analysis have to form one of those foundational blocks. They are the main people where we need to understand them. Conducting stakeholder interview. Once we understand these key people, then we have to use open-ended questions to gather qualitative data from them. And we have to focus on pain points, desired outcome, and project constraints. Qualitative data means data set that doesn't involve figures or kind of open-ended question where you need to interview a stakeholder on one-on-one. This doesn't involve questionnaires. We trying to create questionnaires, sending questionnaires. Most of the time it's through one-on-one open-ended questions to help the stakeholders, explore the stakeholders to understand their need on one-on-one basis. And while doing that, we focus on the pain points. For instance, if we are talking about sales departments, we need to understand their pain points within the sales department. What is their pain point? They want to implement a system that will help them collaborate very well with their lead, with the contact and the lead, help them to manage the lead. Then we need to understand the pain point. Why are they trying to do that? They have been struggling to manage their need, their lead processes. So we need to understand how are they struggling. That is their pain point. This will help us to understand the kind of CRM we are going to look for them. How do we do that? Through interview, one-on-one interview. We can equally use workshop and focus group. When we want to talk to head of department alone, we can just use the one-on-one interview with the head of department. But you can come to a department, you see a lot of people within the department that we need to talk. You need to talk to head of department. We need to talk to the sales rep. We need to talk to all these people. At this point, you see that there is need for you to have a workshop. It's no longer going to be a one-on-one interview. So this is where we start using workshop. When you have more than like 2 people, 3 people within a department or within a unit or a group of stakeholders, then we use workshop. At some point, we use what we call focus group. It's still a workshop, but we have to break the group into different groups. For instance, we are working on implementing ERP system. ERP system have the capacity to serve more than one department. An ERP system, we can use it to serve the finance department. You can use it to serve HR, depending on the capacity. You can use it for supply chain. You can use it for operations, such as ERP, Business Central, Dynamics 365 Business Central. You can even use it for CRM purposes. So in a situation like this, where you are capturing requirements from different departments for implementation of one application, you cannot call all of them in one meeting or in one workshop, it's going to be difficult because their problem is finance. They want to manage their finance department. Then the other team, they are human resources. They want to manage human resources. The other team, they are sales. They want to manage contact and leads. So it's going to be difficult to manage all these groups in one meeting. The only way to do that is to break them into different focus groups. And in every focus group, you focus on their interests. So that is what we call focus groups here, workshops and focus group. Interactive session to gather collective feedback from multiple stakeholders. Useful for refining and validating requirements. We can equally use survey and questionnaires. At this point, it's not interview, it's not workshop, or it's survey and questionnaire. These are different types of purpose, different types of method we can use to capture these requirements. Survey is, we know what is survey, we know what's questionnaire. Creating a question, close-ended questions. When you say close-ended question, means that you cannot, you must select from group of questions. So the questions are there already for you, or such as you cannot say more than yes, or you cannot say more than just either yes or no, true or false, or you select from all these options. So this is what we call close-ended question. That's mainly the kind of questions we use during survey and workshop. Unlike during interview or workshop where we use open-ended question. And where do we use questionnaires and workshops? When you have a large pool of stakeholders that we need to sample their opinion, it's going to be difficult to do one-on-one for them or even use workshop. When you have in an organization, you want to understand the whole, we have a lot of organizations, like in our organization, we have more than 5,000 employees. How come to have 5,000 employees? You need to capture requirements from them. At this point, it's going to be difficult to have one-on-one. You will need to understand their challenges. All you need to do at this point, because of the large number, then you design a survey or you design a questionnaire and send it to them to fill in. And like in our own case now, you see we have a lot of few people here. If I want to capture requirements and I want it fast, it's going to be difficult for me to be engaging you people. Like when I wanted to understand those that have interest in business analysis and those that have interest in project management. For me to keep engaging you people, are you interested in business analysis? Why do you prefer business analysis? If we have like 4 of you, I can just engage you people, try to understand you one-on-one. But you are up to 200. For me to have one-on-one with you is going to be difficult. So to make it very simple for everybody, we use survey, we use questionnaire to capture such, and it works very well as well. It's a very good method of, but if you want to dig deep to understand the problems, it's better to use interviews and workshops. Then have document analysis. Document analysis is the review of existing documentation, such as business plan, process flow, and user guide to understand current processes and gaps. So many companies, they have all this documented, all their business processes, their plans, they have it documented. If they are struggling or having challenges in one process or the other, all you need to do is, if they have it already, capture those documentation and review the documentation. It's very, very important. You understand how to do that. And most companies, as a business analyst, they hire their business analysts to document their processes. You keep on documenting all their processes. And when a process is documented, you as a business analyst, if you want to work on the process, it's going to be very easy for you. All you need to do is demand for the documentations, process flows, process plan, user guide, you review them. While reviewing them, you have to then understand challenges or identify gaps within these processes. We are going to do that, look at that when we are going to be doing documentation and modeling. Then we have observation. Observation is another good way of trying to understand a requirement or capture a requirement. You study a process or you study a user, how when a user is using a particular technology or a particular application or software. For instance, those that are using CRM system, they're having challenges within their CRM system. Maybe the CRM system they are using, they feel is not scalable. They need a better CRM system. You can come to where they are working and observe the way they work with the CRM system and understand their challenges, why they are working. This is what we call observation. And before you can do such observation, you need to tell the person that you need to observe that you want to conduct an observation. If you do not tell them you want to conserve an observation and they are monitoring or watching, then you become spying, and spying is not allowed. So when you want to use this type of requirement gathering called observation, you need to let the stakeholders know the purpose of the observation and how we are going to use that. And we have two types of observation. The observation can be silent observation. You just be silent and monitor them while they do their work. You will have interactive observation. While they are working, you are asking them questions. How are you doing this? How are you using that? What is your challenges while you are using that? That is, they are working and you're observing them and having a chat with them about their work to help you understand the way they are working. So these are two types of observation. Then we have prototyping. To create mock-ups, wireframe to visualize potential solution and validate requirement. That's what we call prototype. At times, prototype can go beyond just mock-up. We can create a pilot stage of a project and use it to understand. It's just kind of creating a pilot stage of a project. These days, it goes beyond just mock-up or wireframe. So wireframe, you can drawing the system, creating a diagram, visual diagram of the technology or the application or the software you are trying, or the solution you are trying to implement. You need to create it in a visualized format so that the business leaders will have a look how the solution is going to look when completed or when implemented. These are all the key types or key points or key elements in requirement gathering. You can use any of these to gather requirements. You can do a combination of one to gather requirements. You can use them all depending on the kind of requirements you plan to gather. But whichever, no matter how complex the requirements you are trying to gather, if you apply any of these or a combination of these types of requirement gathering, it will help you to gather a quality requirement. So let's look at challenges during requirement gathering. We have ambiguous requirements. These are vague or incomplete information leading to misinterpretation. And then we have stakeholder conflict, differing expectation or priority between stakeholders. Okay, let's look at ambiguous requirements, which is vague or incomplete information. You must make sure that the requirement gathering is not by assumption. You cannot assume that this is what the stakeholders want. So this is at times when you collect, you do not understand what the stakeholders are saying, or you're writing different things from what they are saying. That's why it's very, very important that after capturing requirements, that before you start working on that requirement or analyzing the requirement, all the requirements you've gathered, after documenting them, you must take them back to the stakeholders for validation. That's how you can solve this kind of problem. After validation, during validation, the stakeholder will review the requirements you captured and make sure that, yes, you captured what they presented, or if you have made a mistake, this is the time to correct any of the mistake before you proceed to the requirement analysis. It's very important for requirement validation immediately after documenting the requirement. You don't have to go and start analyzing documented requirements without validation. Validation is approval. Then we have stakeholder conflicts. It happens a lot where you have different opinions or priorities between stakeholders. It's always a very difficult situation. But at this point, you as a business analyst, you don't need to side any stakeholder. You need to be at a neutral ground and follow the best practice. That is the way to solve this kind of problems when you have conflicting stakeholders. And again, you need to understand who is the most high influential stakeholders, and that is where it's very, very important to understand the stakeholders and their level of influence. If these two stakeholders are not so influential stakeholder, then you need to escalate their need to a higher stakeholder. So that is how you can solve this kind of problems. Then we have scope creep. Requirement expanding beyond the original scope during the project life cycle. This happens when the project have started. When project have started, documented all the requirements, and you've already started implementation, or you've started planning, a stakeholder will come and start demanding for additional input. At this point, you need, well, it depends on the environment you are working on. If you are working on an agile environment, yes, according to agile environment, requirement can change at any point. As long as the product owner is comfortable for the change, then it can be changed. But if you are working within waterfall environment, then you need to carry out the feasibility studies to understand the impact of the new requirements. Once understand, evaluated, and there is adequate resources provided for the new requirement, then it can be accepted. So that is how to handle scope creep. Another scope creep can come if you are inexperienced, either from you, which is a very dangerous situation, and you shouldn't allow that. If my only person that can manage this is when we have like inexperienced project manager looking at timeline expansions. Timeline is a scope. When you are hitting above your timeline, going beyond your timeline, at times it might not just be adding Requirements. If they, like what in our own cases, where we captured that so many of the team members are not submitting their deliverables on time, this can, lead us into scope creep, and it's not good. So scope is going beyond the original scope. The original scope can be time. Time, if we meant to deliver a project within 6 months, and you are still working on the project, and the 7 months, that is not the scope. The scope is, that is the constraint. Within 6 months is the scope. And if the budget is £10,000 and they are hitting above £10,000, that is not the original scope. So these are challenges we have within our requirement. Another one is poor communication. Misalignment between what is needed and what is communicated. When there is poor communication, and that's why it's good to identify and create a communication action plan at the beginning to understand the level of communication, the nature of communication, the type of stakeholders involved within the communication, and make sure that you don't, tolerate any kind of communication lapse within the project. That's how you can solve all these problems, and have good technologies for communication purposes. So many projects, they don't use best technologies, they don't use the best practice. You find them, they're on a project, they are not even using project collaborative and tracking platform like FreeCam, like Asana, like Monday.com. If you are managing a project and you are not using some of these technologies, it's going to be difficult for you. Okay, let's look at best practice. Engage stakeholders early and frequently. Use multiple techniques for comprehensive understanding. Like during this requirement gathering, I say you can use one, you can combine them to make sure you gather the requirements of best value and quality. You can combine them. Validate requirement through feedback and documentation. I said it already. You need validation. After capturing requirement, you don't just proceed and start analyzing. So many of you does that a lot. Once you finish requirement gathering, the next thing you start producing analysis reports without any validation. And by the time you start producing your analysis report, the stakeholder will say, no, this is not what I wanted. A lot of time we must have spent a lot of time. Prioritize requirements based on business value and impact. When you have multiple stakeholders, more especially if you have stakeholders from different departments, I have to use ERP system where we can have stakeholders from different departments. All the stakeholders will want their own requirements to be number one, to be the prioritized requirements. But you need to prioritize based on the main stakeholder, the project sponsor, or try to understand the main and prioritize according to their need. You need to be with them to prioritize with them. During prioritization, you don't do it alone. Involve key stakeholders to prioritize the requirements. Use a requirement management tool to track the changes. Like I said earlier, so many teams, they don't use these tracking platforms like FreeCamp, Basecamp, Monday.com, and so on. It's very, very important. So that's why I quickly move you people to where we can track it. When we have try to use those tracking device, tracking softwares. We have project plan is good, but it's not enough. Project plan is not easy to collaborate with team members when you are using only project plan like Microsoft Project or Project Labor. It's a software that only you can use. You need a tracking platform where you monitor, where you can assign and monitor team members' inputs. Okay, let's look at step-by-steps when we try to gather requirements via interview. Number one is to define the objective and scope. The purpose, understand the interview needs to achieve, identify project goals and key questions. The step is to clarify the overall project scope and the specific area you want to cover in the interview. Align the interview's objective with the larger business goals. Example, for a software upgrade project, you may want to focus on understanding user pain points with the current system. So that is define the objective and the scope. You need to understand the objective, the goal, and the scope before you can dive into the interview. That is the first thing you need to do. When you have understand the objective and scope, then identify the stakeholders that need to be interviewed. The purpose here is to determine who you will interview to gather the most relevant requirements. These steps are: list all potential stakeholders, users, clients, IT staff. Categorize stakeholders by their roles and importance. Primary versus secondary stakeholders, just like when we use high influence and low influence. You know the primary stakeholders, those that have high influence. And then secondary stakeholders, yes, there are other stakeholders, but they don't have high influence. So you need to do this categorization of stakeholders. Choose individuals with direct knowledge or who will be affected by the project. For instance, for a CRM upgrade, include sales rep. These are people that are going to use this system, and they are the people that are going to suffer so much. The IT team and the marketing department. Then, number 3 is to prepare the interview question. The purpose here: develop a structured list of questions to guide the interview. It's very, very important to not just developing question, but refine your question before the interview. Draft, put open-ended and close-ended questions. Ensure questions cover functional need, pain points, and improvement ideas. Focus on clarity. Avoid overly technical or ambiguous terms. Just use simple languages. Example of questions: what challenges do you face with the current system? How do you envision the new system helping you with the daily tasks? Are there any specific feature you wish the new system could have? These are basic interview questions you can, prepare for your stakeholders. Then schedule and plan for the interview. The purpose is to organize logistics and set expectations for the interview. You need to have a good plan for the interview, whether it's remote interview, like what I'm doing with you, or it's going to be office-based physical interview. You need to plan for it here. Send calendar invitation to interviews with the agenda and objective. Allocate sufficient time for discussion, typically 30 to 60 minutes. Plan the interview format: one-on-one or group interview. Example: schedule a one-on-one interview with the head of sales to gather insights on CRM usage and challenges. You can see here is one-on-one with the head of CRM department. Because head of sales department, not CRM department. Then number 5 is to conduct the interview. Engage stakeholders and gather their input. Start with a brief introduction, explaining the purpose and context of the project. Ask open-ended questions to encourage detailed response, allow the interviewees to speak freely, listen actively, and avoid interruption. It's not good to interrupt when they are speaking. That is rude. So try as much as you can to avoid that, even if they are not making points to you, even if what they are speaking is off point to you. Try to refrain from interruption. Take notes or record the session with permission. Like you see what I do all the time. I always tell you I'm going to put this class on recording. I take permission all the time. That is the ethics. I don't just record. I always say I want to record. Use follow-up questions to clarify any vague or incomplete answers. If you do not understand any input or answer from them, follow it up. Try to clarify it, understand it. Don't assume. Tips: maintain a neutral tone and avoid leading questions. Ensure a comfortable environment so interview feel open to sharing. Another thing is if you plan to crack jokes or use icebreakers, try to be wise about it. Don't ask private question or probing question, or kind of emotional problem. Are you trying to ask the interviewer about their relationship? Don't do that. While try to be using icebreakers. Try as much as you can to avoid such situation. Analyze and summarize the information. The purpose here is to organize the insight gained and translate them into requirements. Review notes or recording, categorize responses by theme or pain points or desired features. Look for pattern and commonalities across multiple interviews. Identify key requirements. Prioritize critical need versus nice to have. At this point, you use what we call Moscow analysis. Translate the response into clear and actionable requirements. That's during summary, when you are trying to analyze, summarize your information you captured. After interviewing sales staff, you notice that multiple users request a faster reporting feature, indicating a key requirement for the system. So when so many people are kind of looking for one system, then you know that that particular thing needs to be prioritized high. Validation of requirements with stakeholders. The purpose is to ensure the gathered requirements accurately reflect stakeholders' need. We've already discussed that earlier. Share a summary of the key requirements with stakeholders. Conduct a follow-up discussion or meeting to clarify any point of ambiguity. Make adjustment based on stakeholders' feedback or new insights. It's very, very important. This number 7, don't skip it for anything. Well, this is where the problem started in most cases. When you think, you don't think, or when you assume, you don't assume. It must be a fact. this is what they want. You don't think this is what they want. Example, present a draft requirement document to the sales manager asking for confirmation or revision or for approval. Number 8, document requirement. The purpose, record of formalize the recorded requirements. Create a requirement document that outline the stakeholders' need and prioritize feature and constraint. Include both functional and non-functional requirements. Keep the language clear, concise, and free of jargon. So by the time you finish validation, then that is when it becomes a document. You finish documentation. Example of a documented requirement is a requirement might be the system must generate sales performance report within 2 minutes. Now is a document. You've documented the requirement. At this point, now you start thinking of how do you solve this problem, because that's when the analysis sets in. Manage and trace requirements. Purpose, ensure requirements remain relevant and align throughout the project. Steps, use requirement traceability metrics to track each requirement through design, development, and testing. Keep communication open with stakeholders in case of evolving need or changes. Example, you might trace requirement for faster reporting to the specific development and testing phase to ensure it met. So traceability means you have to continuously, keep updating this requirement. You don't just keep it and every requirement document need constant updates, asking, collaborating with stakeholders for any changes. It is a document that needs to be constantly updated, making sure that it's always aligning with the project's vision. Continuous feedback and iteration. The purpose is to adapt to new information and evolving project goals. Step, revisit requirements as the project progresses and gather continuous feedback. Adjust or refine the requirement based on stakeholders' feedback or changes in the business priorities. Example, after developing prototype, collect feedback from users and revise the requirements to improve the user interface. So it's a constant improvement, continuous feedback, continuous collaboration with stakeholders to make sure that the requirement document remains green, remains relevant. And conclusion here, conducting interview for requirement gathering is a fundamental process in business analysis. So, by following this structured step, a BA can ensure that the right questions are asked, the correct data is collected, and the stakeholders' needs are clearly captured and validated. So, these 10 steps I created, no matter the kind of project you are working on, if you use these steps, step by steps, this is just like a template that can help you when you want to capture requirements. By applying these templates step by step, knowing the first step to take, second step to take, third step to take, follow it sequentially, and you see yourself becoming a very becoming an intelligent business analyst. These are some other questions, like if you are thinking of how can I get questions, where do I start? There are other ways, formats you can use. These are kind of generic questions I generated that can help doing requirement gathering if you don't know where to start when you are trying to create questions. So we have what we call how, where, when, who, and what requirement gathering questionnaires. For instance, under how requirement question, we have how will you use the feature? How might we meet this business need? How might we think about the feature in a different way? How will we know this is complete? This will help you to, when you're trying to generate questions as a business analyst, planning for requirement gathering questions. Then we'll have where requirement question. Where does the process start? Where does the user access the feature? Where will the user be located physically when using this feature? And where will the results be visible? Then we'll have when requirement gathering question. When will the feature be used? When do we need to know what? When do we need to know about? When will the feature fail? When will it be ready to start? And we'll have who. When we talk about who, it's always talking about stakeholders. Who will use the feature? Who will deliver the input of the feature? Who will receive the output of the feature? Who will learn about the result of someone using the feature? Who can I ask to learn more about this? And we'll have what? What do I know about this feature? What assumption am I making about this feature that I need to confirm? What does this feature need to do? What is the end result of this feature? What are the P's of this feature? What needs to happen next? What must happen before? What needs to be tracked? So when you have pool of these questions and you're planning to, you must know where to start at least. This is, you mustn't use it the way it is, but it's a lead helping you to know where to start and start crafting your own requirement gathering questions you need to use for various workshop, interviews, and things like that. So this is where we're going to be ending it for tonight. And next time we'll look at documenting our requirements and the business process modeling. So we have a lot of information here that can guide us when we want to start. At least we'll have dummy questions here we can, use. And then we'll have step-by-step to help us capture requirements. With this, when we apply this step, apply it very well, then we're not going to, no matter the type of method we want to use, whichever way we want to use, You can use a combination of these, or you can use one out of this. With all these, I think we'll have enough information to start a requirement gathering as a professional BA. So thank you. And if you have questions based on this requirement gathering session, then I can take questions from you at this point. Your blessing, you are raising your hand.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
All right, sir. Sir, my question is, in identifying the stakeholders, is it possible to also adopt project management and documentation gathering process, like maybe power interest grid? Can we also use it as a PA?
Of course. This is business analysis is a project like it's part of project management. So you can adopt it. If you look at when I'm going down, you see where I made a mention of that even in this presentation. If you look at it very well, you see where I made a mention of stakeholders. I made a mention of primary and secondary stakeholders. So you can use that to identify important stakeholders, and both external and internal. These are part of, you must have done stakeholder analysis. This will help you done stakeholder analysis in this before we start doing this requirement gathering. It just takes to help you to understand the stakeholders you need to capture requirement from. That is the main purpose, because you need stakeholder knowledge very well. Before you go in gathering requirements, you must have known your stakeholder. If you don't know them, part of the process here is that you need to know them, you need to analyze them, and so you can capture, because these are the people that you need to capture requirement from. And you need to know the important ones. Is that clear, Blessing?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. It's clear.
Thank you. Okay, we'll have Alex, and we'll have Alabitumi. So Alex first.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Thank you for the presentation. I just want to chip in something because let's assume that during requirement gathering, you are trying to solve a problem in the project, like maybe embezzlement or like a fraud issue during the project, and now you want to do like a requirement gathering by interviewing those who are involved to be able to get the full detail. So as a business analyst, if those people you are trying to interview or try to get information from our cooperative, like maybe they don't want to cooperate with you to give you some information you need, or they hide information. So how will you be able to be successful in that requirement gathering?
You're planning to, this is a crime. You want to solve a crime problem as a police officer, or as there's those who are responsible for crime. So if somebody embezzle fund, it depends on the kind of project, but if they are not giving you the best information, it depends on the kind. For instance, if a crime is committed, most of the time what you are going to be doing, you are not a police officer that will go in there to be interviewing the criminals. How do you think a criminal will come and tell you that he embezzled a fund? Instead of a criminal telling you how he embezzled the fund, he is going to cover the fund. So for you to come and ask how you are going to go and interview a criminal, you know that these are the people that embezzle the fund. How do you think they are going to tell you how they embezzle the fund? They are not going to tell you how they embezzle the fund. So what you are going to be doing for me is trying to understand how that crime was committed. So you are going to try to look at a system that is going on, how porous the system is. That is what not trying to go and ask somebody who commit a crime, how did he commit the crime? You can't do that. All you need to do is, if there is a fund is embezzled through a system, for you to make sure that such things do not happen again, then you need to understand the system, the porous system, the gap within the system, so that you can develop a solution to make sure that such gaps do not happen again. Not you going to the criminal to tell the criminal, how did you commit this crime? Of course, you know that they are not going to even respond to you.
All right, thank you, sir. Because I happen to be
we can't hear you. Hello. Okay, we've lost, maybe it's technical issue. We'll have okay, let's have Alade Tomi.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And everyone. Sir, please, you mentioned something on trace matrix. So I wanted you to expatiate on it. Is it like a template or something?
It's just a traceability where you have a requirement document. It's a document. Your requirement is documented in such a way that you continue to update it, revise it, liaise with the stakeholders, keep on updating. That's what we call traceability. Make sure that it's constantly up to date. You just feel updating your document, making sure your document is up to date and aligns with the stakeholders' need at all time.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we have Innocent Dibia.
Good evening, Mr. Charles.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for the class. Yeah, I just want to get a clarification here. In the process of gathering requirements, and you receive two conflicting information from two or more stakeholders, how do you balance it? If stakeholder A gives you an information that is contrary to the information stakeholder B gives you, how do you balance it? Whose information will you work with as a business analyst?
That's why I said when you have ambiguous requirements, you ask more questions. It must be clarified and refined and harmonized within those stakeholders there. So if we are giving you different information at two different points, maybe you gather this requirement from this stakeholder differently, and maybe later tomorrow or some other time, then those information need to be harmonized. You invite them to harmonize it. So make sure you understand it. So meaning that because at this point is a vague, it's conflicting, it's ambiguous, you do not understand. So you have to invite them to harmonize. Everybody needs to harmonize the information. You see contradicting. When you have contradicting information, all you need to do is harmonize the information, refine the information to come out with a single information or single document. It must be harmonized.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Then we have Gosson. Okay. Chinyere Obi.
Good evening, Mr. Charles.
Good evening.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for today's class. So my question is, when you were talking about the challenges of requirement gathering concerning the scope creep, you said if a requirement is initiated, that we can carry out a feasibility study. So I would love to ask how the feasibility study can be conducted.
Can you say that again?
Okay, in gathering requirements, you said
okay, you said when there is new requirements.
Yes, and you said we can
when a stakeholder is asking for a new requirement. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
In this situation, for instance, I normally use this as an example. You are building a blog website, and all of a sudden the stakeholders say they want e-commerce attached so that they can start selling something in their new blog website. That e-commerce or shopping cart is a new requirement and is very good. You yourself looking at the requirement, you see that is a very progressive requirement. But because you have already captured budget, you've already have a baseline or you draft, you cannot just say, okay. So all you need to do is that you need to, within your team, this requirement, you need to review the impact with your team. The impact of adding that requirement is going to affect your budget, is going to affect your timeline. So this is what we call feasibility studies. So try to understand the impact that is going to bring. The impact is that looking at that, you are going to hit a new budget and a new timeline. So you need to discuss that with the stakeholders. If they are, this is the impact you need to discuss with them, that the original budget will not be enough, and even the main project might not be ready because of this. If they agree, they make provision, a new budget needs to be agreed upon and a new timeline. This means you need to have a new, for the project managers at this point, a new baseline, meaning that you need to create a new project plan to capture the new requirements. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you very
much. Because if you said, okay, when they say we want to add this, you said, okay, capture the requirement and added it. It becomes part of the other requirements. And when the developers is telling developers to do that, they have to come extra days in order to build, then you need to pay them because it's not part of the work initiated. And most at times, some of these developers they are using, what if you hired freelancers? They are not going to agree to develop beyond what agreed with them. So these are where the budget we are going to, if you want them for an extra 1 month in order to develop the shopping cart, then you need to pay for it. So that is where how you handle scope creep. When you see yourself, you must address that immediately. So at this point, I think we've captured questions. Gosson, have I spoken to you? I think I called you before, but you are not responding. So thank you guys for joining, and we have to say good night here at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Charles.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you, sir.
everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you.